When our military, whose purpose is to defend our nation, is subverted, sidelined, removed from viable intercept, or perhaps with even more sinister intent, hijacked as part of an assassination of a president, that isn't part a military coup. When, in the course of an assassination of a president, our nation government fails to ethically, legally without prejudice, bias, or predisposition to outcome, diligently, fully, and timely investigate for the people, our democracy has been taken at the point of a gun, and that benefits the few for the many. Overtly or covertly, that then becomes or is part of a coup, whether intended or unintentional. The union of intent and action with whatever form of malignant thought, malaise, negligent action or inaction then forms a legacy of conspiracy, a history where our nation and its most valuable and only true resource, the citizens, lose their democratically elected government and are taken over by another government, however seemingly benign, malignant or otherwise, and the nation's direction is changed, perhaps irrevocably, and democracy lost. I believe the Kennedy assassination investigations, all documents and related information, all files from any governmental department and or agency should be released in full to the American public immediately. The full facts of the Kennedy assassination are long overdue to the American public. In brief, as I understand my father's duty assignments in the United States Air Force, Colonel A. Christensen worked in counterintelligence, largely from the late 50s, early 60s into the early 70s when he retired. In the early 60s, he was stationed at the Pentagon to the Deputy Director of Plans. Some of his titles in the Air Force were Director, Plans and Policies, Director, Policy and Analysis, Deputy Chief of Staff, Plans and Operations, United States Forces Japan, J3, under the Chief of Staff, Vice Admiral Wilkinson. From 1969 to 1971 or so, he was a commander of the missile squadron at Grand Forks Air Force Base. We discovered he was assigned to counterintelligence during his Pentagon in later years, during the eulogy of my father in 1993, when one of his military officer friends and head who had reviewed his military records prior to the eulogy pointed out that fact during the eulogy presentation. Prior to that, my father's military duties were unknown to my family and me, other than he said he flew in planes as a navigator, as one of his several generic examples he shared. On the evening of President Kennedy's assassination, he arrived home late and visibly upset. I noted this because it was the first time I had ever seen my father so agitated. As the assassination was a topic of discussion at the dinner table, and we were talking about Oswald as the assassin, he listened shortly and then injected into the talk and corrected the family about who killed President Kennedy. He said that President Kennedy was assassinated by a military coup. I recall responding, that couldn't be. Everybody knew it was Oswald because it was on TV news all day long since President Kennedy had been shot. He reiterated that it was a military coup that killed President Kennedy, and added that he knew it because all secure communication lines in the Pentagon had been shut down this very second President Kennedy was assassinated, and remained down for some hours, and no secure communications could be received or made out, but that calls could be made on non-secure lines. He added that only one person in the U.S. had the power to shut down secure communications in the Pentagon. I recall asking if the boss of the Air Force, the general, could have made an order to have the secure communications shut down, or his bosses, and he asserted that no generals or military commanders had such power to shut down all secure communications of the Pentagon. He stated again, only one person in the United States had the power to shut down secure communications in the Pentagon, and that was the President. The discussion continued for a bit, and my father was adamant about the military coup as a source of President Kennedy's assassination. Having watched the TV all that afternoon in school, as everybody froze in place at school and our classroom was riveted to the television, when my father revealed to us that evening about the military coup, I didn't believe him. I didn't understand military coups much either. I was 12 at the time. I did mark the conversation. It was a most unusual conversation at that point in my life. I've recently explored the Kennedy assassination a bit more, and much newer information has come out through the years and decades of some of the facts and details during that time period. Apparently, much of Kennedy's cabinet was out of the country on a flight to the Far East. I understand McNamara remained in the U.S. and was at some sort of meeting or the like at the time Kennedy was assassinated. I understand that he finally was contacted about the assassination by Robert F. Kennedy sometime 30 minutes or so after the shooting, whereupon he returned to his meeting, and from what little I have gleaned, he made no attempt to contact the Pentagon. Then McNamara was called again, later by Robert Kennedy, after J.F.K. died. It's my understanding that the Pentagon did not, and in reality could not, call out to McNamara or any other command to integrate into the ongoing chaos of the assassination of President Kennedy, as the Pentagon was prevented for some hours, as detailed by my father's observation. Any shutdown of the Pentagon's secure lines, the first time in history, mind you, along with other coincidental events surrounding the Kennedy assassination, must lead to the question of who had the authority to make such a shutdown. My father was awarded a Legion of Merit during or at the end of his tour in Japan, where he served as Assistant Deputy Director of Staff to United States Forces Japan J3, and again another in 1973 following his North Dakota assignment. In his earlier years, in the 50s, I recall he voted Republican. I also recall that he did not vote for J.F.K., as I remember some of those conversations during the election period. Following the assassination, he would again not talk directly about that event again. He passed some years ago, and my mother passed 4 years ago. With the memory of the November 22, 1963 dinner table conversation in mind, and this discovery of his counterintelligence work in the military, I decided to do some renewed research into the assassination of President Kennedy, and discovered that considerable new information exists, having come out over the last decades, and I thought this information that I received should be shared with everyone. As I said in the beginning, when in the course of our country the governmental powers fail to competently investigate the assassination of any president, the result then is that the democratic voice and vote of and by the American people was taken from us, the true owners of our nation, and the democracy forcefully stolen. The various state and federal governmental agencies did, in reality, little to effectively, with lack of bias and with full professional and diligent expertise, investigate the assassination of President Kennedy. Some of the bias put into the first investigation is noted by the incorporation of Allen Dulles, who had been fired by President Kennedy in 1961. That is a classic form of conflict of interest. Nevertheless, he was appointed by Johnson. There are many examples of internalized bias with the Warren Commission members and or the methods it utilized. But in total, Dulles' inclusion is just a small part of an investigation that did not conduct a full investigation, leaving out many individuals who were present at the Dallas shooting, or the Warren report changing or modifying the testimony of some individuals to apparently conform to a predisposed outcome of a single shooter. Some, or perhaps much evidence disappeared, or with revelations well after the assassination has been tampered with, such as the front windshield of the limousine of the Kennedys. Apparently, there are a number of individuals who have advised of a bullet hole in the front windshield with front entry, and of one person at the Ford repair site that advises his crew indeed remove the bullet hole damaged windshield to insert a new windshield, and that they were under instructions to destroy the bullet damaged windshield and keep silent about it. Federal governmental complicity again. If such a repair occurred, and it appears it did, it would be nothing less than governmental agencies' participation in a cover-up, a coup. As I understand, the limousine remains solely under the supervision of the Secret Service. Who then would permit the repair, and why no record-keeping of those series of evidence changes? Also largely untouched has been the Bobby Baker-Johnson connections and investigatory potential for damage to Johnson. That melted after he became the president. The list of possibilities for the who killed President Kennedy goes on, and the investigation at that time was not diligent by any legal standards. When President Kennedy was assassinated, our government and democracy was taken from the American people by force. When the fault-ridden investigation of the Warren Commission was complete, the coup was largely successful. Our government has done sparse and little to effectively repair the assault on the citizens of the United States since then, let alone conduct a meaningful investigation. The sealing of the Kennedy assassination records from the citizens, about or by any governmental department, about or by a governmental employee, about or by a citizen or any investigative agency, federal or state, or for national security concerns, constitutes a ruse and is an abomination. Letting it continue for decades is a sign of an apathetic, dysfunctional, and self-serving government. Nothing can stand more high than the right for the citizens of this country to timely know and to have the inherent right, as is embedded within the full spirit of the Constitution, manifested, such that all information available from any and all governmental agencies, notwithstanding, is given to the citizens. Open the rest of the Kennedy assassination files to the citizens of the United States from any and all governmental departments, federal or state, law enforcement and or investigatory agencies, with no exemptions, no exceptions. Conduct a new, full investigation into how our democracy was taken from us the day President Kennedy was assassinated. Create new legislation for occasions of presidential assassinations, wherein a Citizens Presidential Assassination Committee takes the responsibility for the investigation into an assassination and has full investigatory powers with no exemptions or limitations, including national security. No one should be protected concurrent with an investigation or following by sealing records. The stakes are too costly. Perhaps consistent with only one person in the United States having the power to shut down secure communications with the Pentagon is that only one person also had the ability to direct and thwart any subsequent, truthful, Warren Commission or other investigation of President Kennedy's assassination, as well as overseeing other governmental agencies who were bound to the various negligent investigations of the assassination. In this video you've just seen, it's highly likely that some of the faces you saw were directly or indirectly part of the coup, which were responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy. Read and research yourself. If Oswald was involved, it was only in a very minor walk-on role. The individuals who were truly responsible for the assassination of President Kennedy, the coup, have never been held accountable.